Righto, for whatever reason, the floor sanders packed it in for the time being. I can't work out. Hopefully it's just a little overheated. I have been running it straight for a few hours, so maybe once it settles down, cools down a little, I'll be able to run it again. But I managed to get the main floor area sanded down a first pass with a 60 grit on the floor sander. And so what I'm going to go on with in the meantime, while that thing cools down, hopefully, is the edger. So once again, I've never used one of these things. It looks like a pretty simple device. I've fitted a 60 grit disc to the bottom, which was just a simple screw attachment, and it just seems as though there's an on-off switch and it spins and we sand. So let's give it a crack and see what happens. Owing. So very dusty in here. You gotta wear that mask. But as you can see here, and as you saw, I mean, I've only been at it for a couple of minutes, but it's really ripping that back nicely. So that's a 60 grain, and that's covered that little stretch. It's a fairly hard little thing to hang on to. It kicks and carries on a fair bit, particularly when that paper is nice and fresh, but that's going to do the job nicely, and it'll also be a good little tool for getting into a few little bits and pieces along the floorboards where I didn't achieve a really good level with the floor sander. So I'll crack on with that, and I'll check in again when I've made a bit of progress. See ya. Here's a hot tip for young players. Don't do what I just did and forget to put the dust bag on your edge sander. So had there, dust bag, failed to put it on, covered in this stuff. So it's taken me a few minutes to realise, and I've gone and caked everything with dust. So there you go, learning as we go. But if you're going to do this for yourself, chuck the dust bag on. I recommend it. Well, unfortunately I've been beaten by the machinery for this afternoon. That floor sander, for whatever reason, won't fire up again. I'm hoping that it's just overheated a little bit, and that tomorrow morning I'll give it another crack and it'll fire up when it's had a good chance to cool down. But failing that, I'll need to reschedule and get another one to finish the job. So what I got up to was the 60 grit. So I gave it a decent sand with 60 grit. I just put on the second belt of 60, and my intent was to go over it again and get rid of, I don't know if you can see them, but there's some fairly solid diagonal sand marks in there from going across at 60 grit, which were coming out nicely. I was going to go with the grain for the second run of the 60 with the floor sander and just start sanding them out, and then step down to some finer grits and go from there. So what I did, as you saw, was I moved on to the edge sander and gave that thing a good go around the outside, and so that jarrah has all come up really nicely. In the corners here, couldn't get right into some of these corners, so I'll probably have to do a tiny bit of hand sanding in the corners, but not much at all, and managed to smooth everything down in all those corners, and it's come up beautifully. And it was also a great tool to use along these edges here, where I had a lot of lips where the boards met the edging. But now that's all sanded down to near perfect, and with a couple more different grits that'll come down nicely. So you can see in these corners here, it's come up with a really good result. So that's a great little tool. As with the other sander, the trick is to keep your paper pretty fresh. So if you let your paper get a bit blunt, you'll find yourself sort of doing more work than necessary. I guess it's a trade-off between how much money you want to spend on sandpaper and and how much you want to sort of thrash a dead bit of paper and try and make it work. But certainly if you change your paper regularly, and if you're going to do it, budget for that. That makes your life a whole heap easier. So that's just a 60 grit sand on the perimeter, and as I said, I got the first pass on 60 on the floor as well. So look, I think compared to a few hours ago, it's looking great. It's frustrating that I can't finish the job that I wanted to, but anyway, we're on track, and you can't help getting beaten by machinery. So look, thanks for watching, guys. I'll keep posting when I get some more equipment, and then I'll move up the grains, and then eventually of sandpaper, that is, and eventually I'll get some varnish on it, and hopefully it should come up really nicely. Alrighty, cheers. So here we are again, the point we're at now. I've taken this fascia and laid it on the ground and gave it a really good sand down to, with the edge sander, down to 100. So that was the finest paper that I had on the edge sander. And then what I've done is I've fitted it in place. So what I wanted to achieve there was just have that on while I was still sanding the rest of the floor, so that I can sand this edge as flush as I can and get the lip out of that while I'm at it. It's gone on pretty well. There was a bit of a warp in it actually. It kind of came out at the top, and so I had to nail it a bunch more than I wanted to, which is kind of ironic, having spent a stack of time filling all the nail holes. I've then gone and made a whole stack more. But anyway, I've sanded that down to a point where I can then varnish it. I thought I'd do that while I had it flat. It'd be much easier than trying to sand it whilst it's on the side there. With the rest of the floor, so as per the last video, that's just been taken back to 60 with the floor sander, and then the edger around the outside, the jar, has been taken back to 60 before, unfortunately, the floor sander packed it in. Now I haven't been able to get that started again, and so what I've decided to do, and it's not going to be great fun, but I'm just going to run over the floor with the edger. So I mean, it's only 13 square meters. It's going to be a terrible job and back-breaking, but just to go through the remaining grits. I won't get as good a finish, I don't anticipate, because without the long flat strokes of that floor sander. But that said, it's a rustic bar area in a man cave, so I think I'll be able to get a good enough finish with the edger. It's going to be a tedious job, but it'll get the job done today. The other option would be to wait for another sander to become available for hire, and I don't really have the time for that. So I will crack on with the floor sander and check in a little bit later on when I've got it down to a bit finer sanded. Okay, cheers. So I'm finally at a point where I can start putting on some lacquer. I've given this a really good sand, which was, as predicted, a fairly tedious job, back-breaking with that little edger. So the big belt sander packed it in, and I used the edger. Anyway, sanded it back to, I only took it back to 100. So as it turns out, I thought I had 120 grit paper, but I didn't. So just 100 was it, but it's come up pretty well. Got most of the sanding marks out of it. There's some minor imperfections, but for what it is, it's going to be great. And then I've given it a really good sweep down. I've given it a really good vacuum. I've let the dust settle and then repeated all those processes. So hopefully the surface should be pretty clear after that. I thought it was fairly clean, and then I took a lint-free cloth, like a microfiber cloth, and gave it a bit of a wipe over, and a bunch more dust came off. So that was just a wet cloth, slightly damp cloth, and a bunch more came off. So that's definitely worth doing before you put your varnish on, to make sure you've got as much sort of dust and dirt off the surface before you start. So look, I'll get some varnish on this, and we'll see how it comes up.